trying to figure out how to actually apply solutions, boy, it is really, really challenging. And but it's good work for us to do. So just to do like a quick, like a kind of a 1-minute recap, because we need to have all three of these pieces in our heads to go to the next one. Can we just go to the slide? Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So we would sit here and say, so what we need to be kind of, if we had one word to describe our best action step forward for each of these spheres, so adolescent development, we need to be cheerleaders. We need to be celebrators. We need to be, just speaking life and identity into young people and celebrating the phase that they're in, that they don't feel like they're bad because they're figuring out how to become an adult. But on the same hand, we need to have the freedom in our lives as adults to not accept the cookie cutter mold that the culture has created. And one of the things that we just need to think about this for a second. Remember, by and large, the structure of our society has been created by economic engines, right? Whatever tends to fuel the economy tends to become accepted practices, right? That is what drives it. So when you think about it, we don't just want to accept carte blanche the structure of society that has not been intelligently designed, no one's really sat there and, it takes enormous health risk to overcome economic profit in terms of public legislation, right? So think about how long we knew that cigarettes were killing people before we started enacting different laws, right? Because you have to get to the point where the crisis is catastrophic and intolerable before you're going to address, billion-dollar industries. That's just the way our society works. And so what we don't want to do is just say, well, yeah, this is just the way it is. I think we just need to give ourselves permission. Nobody loves the young person in your life the way you do. The corporation doesn't, and listen, our kids have had phenomenal teachers, great teachers who we have been so thankful for. But listen, those teachers still don't love my kid the way I love my kid. And so when we look at it and say it's okay for us to kind of rebel a little bit, and actually I've heard that the Powell River is kind of like the seat of unconventional rebellion in BC anyway. So maybe this is just like, you're all hippies and draft dodgers. And so, hey, let's rebel against the system, I'm just teasing. But, but the funny thing is, you get into certain segments of society, there's almost this fear about what if we were to rethink. Well, I don't think we should. I think we should go for it. And then the third thing here is setting boundaries. Because boundaries don't set themselves. That's the thing. And so if we need to start off by setting boundaries for our kids. And as they get older, we'll work into setting boundaries with our kids. And as they get a little bit older, we'll work on affirming the good boundaries set by our kids until eventually they just know how to set boundaries. And the reason I can't give you an age for those steps, by the way, is because the reality is with the artificial extension of adolescence being what it is, we have 14 and 15-year-olds that there's never been boundaries, and now is the time coming and saying, I'm going to have to set some boundaries at 15 when really we should be making them together, or you should be setting your own. So it's just that it has to work in that progression. It's a taught process. So when it comes to the really scary question, which is what I think, I said yesterday brings most of us here, is we come to these things because we either have someone in our life who's in crisis, we have a young person who has been absolutely turned inside out by something just difficult, or we're trying to prevent one. So we need to look and saying, if there is a crisis, if it does come to a point, if it is your young person who is literally a mess, they can't eat, they can't sleep, they're not themselves, you find out like there's just this next level bullying going on at school. Maybe you discover it because you walk into the bathroom one day and you see, blood droplets, and they're always wearing long sleeves, and you get the picture. And so self-injury is a part of this, and it's this horrifying discovery. And you say, one of the things when we talk about self-injury, I try to help parents understand this by saying, how bad do you have to hurt on the inside to feel better by hurting yourself on the outside? The pathology in self-injury is fascinating, but it's dark. And and so when we start to see those crisis moments, the question is, what do we do? How do we respond if it's us? And the key there in how we respond, so we're going to skip the top 10 list and come back to it, but the key in how we're going to respond, go to the very last slide there, is we need to be present. And so there are some reasons why we struggle to be present as adults when it's our kids that are in crisis. I think probably the most significant one is that their crisis brings to the surface every single one of our insecurities. Because when you're facing something that is bigger than you, that you don't understand, that is so big and so scary, and by the way, you're facing it inside of a cultural context where, let's just be honest, you kind of feel like your peers are all looking at whatever's happening with your kids and making, inside their head judgments about how you're doing as a parent. That's the reality we live in. We meet a lot of parents who, the reason they haven't reached out for help, they said, if my friends knew my kid was going through this, they would think I was an awful parent. It's interesting how the crisis points that our young people go through will bring up our own insecurities. And so sometimes their issues trigger an insecurity in us. We were maybe bullied when we were younger, and it's left a mark. We've never really dealt with the emotional trauma from that. And so it becomes this thing where entering into the place where they are is actually very difficult for us. It's re-traumatizing for us. The insecurity can maybe because it makes us feel like we are inept parents. So one of the dangers, there's probably one of those helpful psychological theories to help us get through some of these things. We look at something called cognitive dissonance theory. And so it's this idea that we don't like ideas that make us uncomfortable, is a nice way to say that. We don't like stories. So here would be a way to look at it, is that if something happens and there's two explanations as to why, and one of those explanations makes me feel really insecure because the conclusion is, I'm really, really bad at this. And the other explanation makes me very comfortable because it says it's not really your fault and it will all be fine anyways. Human nature is that we would, and this is cognitive dissonance theory, that we're going to choose the explanation that is most comfortable for us. And so that's really dangerous when it comes to that we actually have kids in crisis. When we have kids in crisis and something triggers inside of us and we say, I don't like this right now. I don't like the idea that I may not know what to do. I don't like the idea that my baggage from when I was 16 is coming up right now. There's a danger in that we actually disengage. And so we take a step back and we will tell ourselves whatever story works for us. We will say, that's not really bullying. That's just the way kids are. Everybody needs to toughen up their own skin, even though we've got credible people that we trust telling us, no, like this is messed up. Or we will sit there and we will say, this is just the way things are these days. It's just a phase. I'm sure she'll get through it, even though all of what we're seeing is chilling us to the core. So disengagement is not just bad because it means that young people don't get the help that they need, but it also reinforces the root of the problem, which what was the problem was isolation and systemic abandonment. So when you actually reach the point where we are in crisis, when the adults that are in your lives say, this is so uncomfortable for me, I'm just kind of, or here's the thing, I don't know what to do, this is really hard, I'll get you help with this therapist, but that's between you and the therapist and you guys deal with that, I just can't, I'm just not qualified. See, that's still just another way that we see systematic abandonment, and young people will feel that. And so we have to figure out how to be present. Sometimes it hurts. And that's something. Listen, if you're going to be present in the life of a young person, whether they're your child or not your child, or just somebody who is going through this, you need to be prepared for the fact that it is going to hurt you to be there. Because pain is not isolated to the person in the experience. If you enter into their world, it will hurt you too. But what we have to begin to think about is if we as parents are saying, man, it hurts me to be in this situation. What is it like for my 13-year-old who's in it? So one of our responsibilities as responsible and caring adults in the lives of our young people is to be someone who can bear and share their pain with them. That even if we can't cure it, we will help carry it. We will be present in it. So, of course, the other big complication is if you're in a crisis and the root of that crisis is a profound sense of isolation and abandonment, you may have a natural instinct to push away anyone who's trying to be present with you. And that's the other reason why sometimes we're not present, because the answer is they don't want me here. This is where persistence is going to be the key. We have to figure out what it looks like to not make it worse, to not, we're not charging in there, like riding in like John Wayne and being like, too bad, I'm here. Like, that's not going to be helpful, but to figure out what it looks like to be present, even though they say they don't want you present, and to demonstrate your commitment and perseverance to being present with them through this until they let their guard down. And it calls for an enormous amount of perseverance. It's very, very difficult. And believe me, if you've been through this, or you have friends who have parented through something like this, listen, it will put your heart through the ringer. It will be the hardest year, 2 years, 3 years, length of time. You as an adult, you are going to need support structure in your life through that crisis. You need people that you can walk with through this. And that is why, like I said, the biggest thing that scares me is when I see a parent says, I didn't reach out for help because everyone was just going to judge my parenting. Wow. How can you be there for your kid when you're like, no one's there for you, and it just complicates things, right? So we've got to have the courage to ask for help, to ask people to go through these seasons of our lives with us, and we have to have community because it's very, very difficult. So here's how we can learn to be present. With your teenagers, learn to ask really good questions. I could do a whole other seminar on this. Some of my other training was in life coaching, and so one of the things we look at there is we say most people just are surrounded by those who they're just giving advice all the time. So here's your number one trick to being present with the life of a teen: stop giving advice. Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it. No advice. And so my rule when I work with teenagers in crisis, and we do work with a number of teenagers in crisis all the time, you're not going to get advice from me, and if you ask for my advice, I'm still not going to give it to you. You would have to literally and I make them beg for it. Seriously, I'm not just handing out advice, because here's the challenge with advice is, first of all, advice, every time you've gone through something and someone's given you advice, you know what I know what's happened is they gave you advice and you're like, I've already tried that, thanks for nothing. Always first thing, well, have you tried this? And you're like, yes. I tried it. It didn't work. They come up with solutions that ignore the most significant undercurrents of your particular problem because they don't really understand, because they haven't listened long enough to get it. And so advice is actually very isolating. And so what we actually learn to do instead is we learn to ask really, really great questions. Because most of us, when we're in a crisis, what we actually need is not someone to tell us what to do. We need someone to ask us the right questions so that we can start to figure out what to do. And so we begin to ask, you just become the question asker. And they're not closed questions. You're not allowed to ask questions that end in yes or no. Do you feel like this? Do you feel like that? Does this happen? Stop. And you're also not allowed to ask why questions, because they make you defensive, by the way. Well, why did you do that? I'm on trial. So here's a couple of tips that might change the way that you ask questions with young people. When you want to ask the question where you say, why did you do this? Just word it this way. What are some of the reasons that were behind that decision? Help me understand. Do you know what your best question is? You mentioned blah, whatever it was. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? If you want to know how to open up a conversation, that's how you're going to open it up. Okay, so you said you had the worst day of your life at school. Okay, tell me more about that. And they tell you a little bit more about it and say, well, and this happened, this, okay. Okay, so I can't believe your friends did that to you. Okay, tell me more. What else? You need to let them tell you the story. That's being present in their story. You're coming in to try and solve their problem at that point is not the most helpful thing. So learning to ask really good questions is really, really, really important. Now, if they're still little, And I mean, I just so love it when, if you're here and you've got littles at home, you get to do the work of crisis prevention. Oh man, this is such a good time for you to be a part of this. Let me just share with you a couple of things. It's all about your prep work. So because all of this centers on isolation and abandonment, so here's some of the things that we had the advantage of having a lot of experience in youth work before we had kids, and then we had kids, and we were actively involved working with kids through all kinds of crisis. And so I just started actually interviewing teenagers that were doing better through crisis than other people and asking them what their parents were doing. And then I started figuring out how to do this with my kids. So if they're still little, one of the things I would highly recommend you do, and you start this when they're like preschool, at least once a month, you take them out on a little date. You go to Tim Hortons, you buy them a donut, and you just sit there and you just get them to talk about anything at all. It doesn't matter. Just go and just have them talk to you for half an hour, and just ask them questions and listen. Just work on this. Now you start doing that, and you do that at least once a month for their entire lives. Because we did this, and we do this. And what it does is it creates this environment. Listen, my 13-year-old does not know a world where talking to dad is awkward and weird. Because she's talked to dad her entire life about anything. And don't get stuck on, well, we want to talk about the big significance. Listen, a lot of the things that are really significant to them are really insignificant to you. You just, whatever they want to talk about, we're going to talk about. And sometimes it's so silly things, it's so small things. But what you're doing is 1,000 tiny investments create the opportunity to break down isolation. Now, just because your kids are already older does not mean that we can't do it. We can remediate this, but begin to put these routines into our lives where it's not like, yeah, you're in crisis, but you know what? We're just going to go out and hang out, and we're just going to talk about being present in your life, and we're not going to talk about the crisis because you're sick about talking about it, and you're already trying to distract yourself in a billion ways. Let me be the distraction. Let's go do something. But we start doing this thing where we become highly, highly active and present in our kids' lives. We talked about setting up the adults in their lives early on. So it's this thing where, we just started realizing as our kids got older, we started handpicking, be like, I want that one, that one, that one, that one. Great. We have these conversations. They're 10 years old. And I'm talking to, I work in a church with a bunch of youth leaders. I'm talking to youth leaders in my youth group that I'm like, you're awesome. And I'm like, hey, can I ask you to do me a favor? Here's a Starbucks card. Would you be willing to pick up my little girl and take her out for a coffee and just chat and just hang out? Just do that a couple of times, and all of a sudden, this is now, that person's cool, and we did it when they were young, so it becomes this thing where, there's a connection there. We can go back to that. So you can actually really strategically, and you should pick. They say it takes a village to raise a child. Pick your village. Pick them. Don't let your kid pick them. You pick the village while your kid is still under your direct influence. They will live with it because the relationship's already formed. And you just say to them, listen, I don't need you to be anything for my kid except the biggest cheerleader. I don't need you to discipline them. I don't need you to try and re-steer the course. I need you to do nothing like that. I just need to know that for my kid that they will be like, oh man, that adult thinks I'm amazing. They are invested. They care about me. They love me. I like hanging out with them. Please just do that. They're 10. And when they're 15, we'll talk about what we'll do next. And you become a part of this very, very intentionally. I talked about being present is this pre-work and this continuing work. It's the reason why I'm not just dropping my kids off and I'm going to be part of this. We're going to walk into the place with you. Just some of these strategic pieces are everything. And when your kid is actually in crisis, when it happens to your kid, you gotta be brave enough to cry with them. You gotta be brave enough to say, I have no idea what we should do here, but I'll promise you this. We'll figure it out together. I don't know what we'll do. I have no idea. What I really care about is you. We'll figure it out. We'll do it together. Being present in the lives of young people is the best thing that we can do for them as adults, because what got them into the crisis was a high sense of isolation. So with that being said, let's get really practical, and then we'll go to some Q&A. I know everyone came to these seminars to figure out what to do with the technology thing. So here's the 10 commandments of tech. I think I wrote them on your sheet because you already taken enough notes. So here's what I would give. I give these to all the parents, in our organization, and just say, hey, like this is, if you do these 10 things, you're going in the right direction. So the first thing is we have a rule. Say there's absolutely no technology allowed in your room at bedtime ever. Because nothing really good is going to happen with technology in bed. Listen, there's not an exterior door that goes, being like, oh, go to bed. Oh, by the way, lock the deadbolt on your door that goes out to the street, and please don't go outside tonight. We don't build houses that way. But technology in the bedroom is like, oh, by the way, we put an extra door to the house into your room, and the SkyTrain stop is right across the street. So, hey, but don't go out tonight. Okay. No tech in the bedroom at nighttime. We just don't do it. That is just like one of those base things that solves a bunch of problems, and especially the sleep schedule issue. Right? Because remember, poor sleep is a massive contributing factor to mental health issues in the lives of young people. Okay, it's huge. Use a router level filter on your home internet. And what we mean by that is that, back in the olden days, they used to sell software to put on your computer that was going to look for bad words on the page. And so what it meant was that, hopefully no pornography would come onto your kid's computer, but also if they ever had to do a research project for biology class, everything was also prohibited because, it used in anatomical terms. And you're like, well, that doesn't work. So thankfully, there are better solutions now. There's a number of solutions out there. One of the way we use it in our house is called Circle. It's this little box. Really easy to set up. It's like $100 one time. It's great. If you want to pay $8 a month, you can actually make it work on your kids' devices even when they're not at home. So pro that, awesome. But the thing is the reason it's at the source where the internet comes into the house. There's no software on their phones or their computers to tamper with or disable. I'm going to go, onto their phone and install 5 things and be like, okay, now thankfully it's safe, and we're not going to have creeps trying to message them about stuff. It's happening at where the internet comes in. And that's just the baseline standard that we should all be doing. Let me put it this way, for parents who are like, well, I'm not sure if it's totally necessary. My kids are responsible. Okay, that absolutely makes total sense. Do you have a lock on your door? Do you have one? I know you live in Powell River. She's like, well, I don't use it because there's no crime here. But whatever. But guess what? The internet's not like Powell River, is it? So the internet's really busy and it's really international. So let me ask you this: if you move to Vancouver next week, are you just be like, yeah, totally, I'm just not going to lock my door? That's really, really, really a bad idea. Okay, I used to live outside Detroit. We locked our doors in the daytime when we were home. The internet's more like that. Think of the internet as digital Detroit, and you'll make good decisions, okay? Boy, I'm so sorry for anyone from Detroit who listens to this recording later. We love you all. Okay. Anyways, know the apps that are on your kid's phone. In these seminars, we used to give parents a list of apps. There's this app, this app. You know what the problem is I could give you that list of apps, and next month it's all different because that's literally the speed of change. So I'd rather give you principles. But you need to know what all the apps in their phone is. And meaning, first of all, it should be in your hands on a semi-regular basis. What's this? With our kids are still young, and so, I've got a 13-year-old who, she wanted an iPad, and we said, we weren't not going to buy one for you. She said, can I save up and buy it for myself? So she saved up $500 over the course of 2 years and bought an iPad. Because we were trying to parent responsibility and discernment. So she bought nothing else for 2 years, saved $500, and bought an iPad. Knowing full well that before she bought the iPad, we say, fine, if you get an iPad, here's going to be the rules. Never lives in your bedroom. You get the number of hours on it per day that we specify. We have access to absolutely everything. We approve every individual app. And by the way, you also don't get the internet browser on there because you're only 12. Yeah, it's fine. I just really want it. I'm like, fine, cool. Buy it. She bought it. And before she could open it, okay, this is just me being a youth worker. I made her give me I printed out news articles on what happened with, the Amanda Todd story, if you're familiar with that, young girl about her age, who was extorted into sending nude photos online and eventually committed suicide because the person who was extorting her said they were going to turn these photos public and ruin her life yet again. And so she committed suicide. So I made I think she might have been 11 at the time, actually, when I made her do this, but 11, 12. I made her read a 3-page news article about this and then hand in a written assignment to me telling me where it went wrong and what happened and what her parents could have done differently, what she could have done differently, and what the real risks were. And then we went into phase 2, which is now these are the rules, and we actually have a written contract about how this thing's like. I know you think I'm crazy, but we put all these things. And so one of the things was in the written contract, it says, my mom and dad are allowed to have 100% access to my device without ever asking permission, and I would never, ever even remotely be upset or feel like my privacy is being invaded, because I knew that the condition for having this device was that they are absolutely allowed. Like, it's not even a question. They wouldn't even ask, because of course they're looking at it. They should be looking at it. That's the rule. So I'll never, ever be mad that my parents were on my device, because I'm knowing before I even open it out of the box that that's exactly what they're going to do. Okay, great. So this is now in writing. You've signed it. And we had her prick her finger and put some blood on there. No, we didn't go that far, but it's like we put this rule in place, right? So then because you're looking at it, now she's at an age where every app she wants, something buzzes up on my phone. It's like, Kylie would like to download this app. And it's like, okay, I'm looking at it. Is this a good app? Whatever. So I know what's on there. But as she gets older, it's still going to be like, what is that? Right? So it's interesting. Know the apps that are there. And also have a family app policy that excludes certain types of apps. So our family app policy is in our family. And this is family. This is not her. This is all of us. In our family, we don't do apps that are based on the principle of anonymity. If it makes you anonymous, we just don't do it in our family. That's not a kid thing. That's an everybody thing. So when we're talking about apps that are based on the principle of disappearing messages or untraceable stuff, or you don't have to create a user account, you can post anonymously, we're just like, no, we just don't do that, because our conviction as a family is that secrets will kill you, and anonymous makes us into bad people. There are things we would do if no one ever knew that we would never otherwise do. It's just not a good idea. So we've just decided if the app is based on the principle of anonymity, we just don't do it. Period. Nobody does it. And that's our family rule. I mean, we can talk about what kinds of things we're okay with and not okay with. So again, what's the reason we have those conversations? Because we're trying to teach boundaries through example. We want to model this and say this is kind of what we think should work here. We insist on a daily technology-free FaceTime. So the rule in our house that everyone can always tell you, and the reason they can tell you is because Dad is always the one who's struggling with this, is no phones at the table, Dad! This is the thing. But it's, my kids keep me on this, which is really, really good. But we have this time and space. So the rule is, so when you come home and it's time for dinner, the phones go on silent. They're supposed to go in a little bin by the front door. They don't even make it to the table. And if I forget and my phone buzzes, my 9-year-old will be like, I heard that, Dad! No phones! It's like, you're trying to turn it off. You're like, you're trying to open it. No, I'm just turning it off, I swear. It's like, get it out of here. This is in so much trouble every time. But the reason why, because, you're going to have to pick something that works for the rhythm of your family, but we have to find a place where when are we going to have time together that is not inhibited by technology, that there's not something else going on. And just so you know, parents struggle this way more than kids do. Like we do. It's hard. There's always an email I should answer. There's always some kid in crisis. There's always something I forgot to do that I should set a reminder. This is the thing. And so sometimes what we do is we had a really busy week. We'll actually carve out, it's movie night, and there's just and no tech in the room, man. We're just going to sit together and watch something together. We're going to play a game together. And it's just not accessible. So daily tech-free. FaceTime. Set those boundaries. Number 6, model appropriate boundaries for the social media world. So sometimes I get parents who be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that my daughter posted this on Instagram. And I just smile at them and be like, I can totally believe that because I see the stuff you write on Facebook all the time and you are really needy and have no boundaries. And no, I think that, and then what I say to them is, I say, that's crazy. So the thing is, when your children are watching, when I see a parent being like, this is the Facebook post. Okay, excuse me, but a little rant. I'm like, oh no. You're venting to the world your personal problems, like, oh my gosh. Remember I mentioned yesterday I have that questionnaire and the thing. It's like, I overshare on social media because I'm needy and I don't know any better. So this is more of a problem with parents than it is with kids, but the kids who do have a problem with it, you learn it from their parents. So we model what's appropriate to share on social media. And so one of the things that if you ever do try to follow me on Instagram, and I would have to approve you because my life is not open to the world because I'm modeling that for my kids and not just any stranger on the planet can follow me on Instagram. If you do manage to follow me, you're going to find that there are many, many days in between posts most of the time. And we're selective about what's posted. And we may go on an entire family vacation and maybe one post. It's not this constant stream. And why? Because we're trying to model listen, like my validation, like this family is more important. Like it's not just about external validation. And so there is going to be these boundaries that some things are too special to go on social. If I'm really honest with myself about an adult, I ask myself, why am I posting this? Am I posting this because I know who follows me and I'm going to get a billion high fives and you're going to think I'm awesome? It's kind of self-serving, so maybe I should just not. Parents who rant about their kids on Facebook, I usually don't filter my comments back to them. Actually. Did you hear what my kid wrote about me on Instagram? Yeah. I also read what you wrote about your kid on Facebook last week. Why do you think they did it? Is the advantage, though, of being like, I've worked at the same organization for 7 years, I can just say whatever I want. Like, they never fire me for it, so it's good. Anyways. Engage your kids' real world and digital world. So a lot of parents struggle with this. In other words, when you're thinking about engaging, being present with your kid, you're only thinking about the physical world. You're thinking about game night, you're thinking about family dinner, you're thinking about sitting with them physically. Do you ever engage their digital world? Because the big thing we ask ourselves with people is, it's funny, when we talk to adults about, well, there's the digital world and the real world. How do you define the real world? The real world is whatever world you spend the most time in. So for many young people, the real world is what's online and the physical world is the alternate universe. And they like the digital world better because they can invent their own persona and their own identity and become whatever they want. Whereas in the real world, they're stuck with just them. They don't have a photo filter for their face, and they don't have the ability to curate their image, and they don't have the ability to connect with, people on the other side of the planet. They've just got to be stuck within their hometown, and it's boring, and it sucks, and I just wish I looked different than I did, and all this sort of thing. So a lot of time they don't like the real world. They like the digital world. That's now the real world. So you need to be present in their spheres, and what that means is, if you do not have an Instagram account, but your kid has an Instagram account, guess what you're getting? An Instagram account. So this is the trick that eventually when my kids get social media, they're 13 and they don't need it yet, eventually when they get it, what they're going to find is I will do to them the same thing I do to all 100 and something kids in our youth group who I follow them on Instagram. I just make sure I like their pictures on such a consistent basis that they know that I'm watching. And then they all create second accounts. And I always request to follow. And when it's been 2 days and I didn't get approved, I text them like, hey, I don't know if you saw, but I requested to follow your Instagram. Like, what's up? Oh, I didn't notice that. I'll let you in now. And then I always go on there, and there's only one photo posted, and I'm like, you deleted it all. Sweet. So it's just great. So the thing is that you want to be present in the digital world with them. So if they have an Instagram account, you better have an Instagram account. If they have a YouTube channel, you better have a YouTube account. You better be watching everything that they're streaming and be the first person to comment. There should be this idea that there isn't this digital world that I can go, and the adults that care about me in my life are not there. And if you play this really well, it won't be this like, oh, I can't get away from them. It actually turns into, well, that's just normal. They're just involved in every aspect of my life. Okay, so grandparents, get yourself whatever social media your grandkids have and just start commenting and liking. It was so great. My grandmother just passed away. When she got Facebook, I just, every now and then, I get these comments in all capital letters. You are my grandson and I love you so much. And I'm like, this is a comment, not a private message, but I love you so much, Grandma. Like, it's great. You know, like, she had no idea what she was doing. I just loved it. That was great. So good. So good. You know, be part of it. In that note, pay attention to the really prominent digital influences. So one of the reasons you need to have that Instagram account is you can see who's following my kid. Well, I just started like following all the people that follow them. Like, seriously though, I love it when I have these conversations with being like, yeah, like your mom tried to follow me on Instagram. And it's like, heck yeah, she did. Like, that's like the best parenting ever. You follow all your kids' friends on Instagram, like posting them, like, you know, posting things and like tagging them in the post, be like, you're the best. Like, you know, it's just, you just be so present in their life, right? But who are the digital influencers? And when it comes to, when you look on, there's like, oh man, they're following this celebrity account. Who the heck is that? I'm going to Google them and find out who they are and what they're all about and what kind of music they're making and all that kind of stuff, because I want to know who the digital influencers in my life, in the life of my kids are. Plan an annual unplugged retreat and vacation with your family. Seriously, I'm not joking about this, by the way. You pick a camping trip or you pick a vacation where you're just like, we're just going tech-free on this one. And so here's the weird experiment. I mean, it's different. My kids don't have social yet, right? Because they're 13, 9, and almost 2. And you know, my almost 2-year-old had an Instagram for a while. We took it away from him because he was just crazy with that thing. But anyways, I'm joking. So, but no, they don't have social yet, so it's not quite the same thing. But with our, you know, I've been doing youth work for the last 17 years. And so I do 3 events every year that are tech-free. And kids pay to come to them. And every time at the end of the event, so all these kids, it was their first time at that event, they're like, "Do you serious about that no phone thing?" Like, "Yeah, totally." And by the way, like, we're going to check. Like, good luck. You think you're hiding it? You know, always the kid is like, because we just have this bin. We're like, "Yeah, put your phone in the bin. You'll get it back later." "Oh, I just left it at home because I know it was there." But like, "You're totally lying. Can I go through your bag right now?" "No, like I totally left it at home." I'm like, "Okay, it's my phone." You know, like you have those moments. So we take all their stuff and we put it in this bin and we just lock it and we put it away. And they go through the entire event without any tech. And at the end of it, we give them their phones back and they'd be like, "I don't even want to turn this on. I'm a slave to this thing." You give them a little bit of freedom. It's unreal how much it unlocks in their lives. I actually do a 2-week summer trip every year where no one's allowed to bring phones. It's like digital detox for the first 3 days. They get back after 2 weeks away and they have not had a device. And most of them don't turn it on until after, like even though we give it to them for the drive home, they don't turn it on once. They're craving a reintroduction to the sense of community in the real world, whereas all they know is pseudo-community, a very fake form of community in the digital world. It's amazing what it does for them. So I would highly encourage you to do that as a family. And make sure you have all their passwords and access to their stuff. All of it. It's so important. You know, their kid should not have a password that you don't have. Yeah, so there you go. So there's some tricks. If this stuff interests you, there is you can put up the link that you have. So I had to write a paper about this. Is just if you happen to be a Christian. I wrote a paper specifically on what would a Christian response to the world of new social media look like. And so I used Snapchat as an example because it felt like it was like this is kind of the new era of social media. So I wanted to look at it. And so anyway, so this paper is a little academic. It's is a Christian theological response. What would it look like to be faithful in Christian values in responding to the world of new social media? And so anyway, so there's there. Now if you download that and you get to page 3 and you're like, what is this guy saying? Like, because it's an academic paper and you might just be like bored. There is a much friendlier version that we've adapted that we use as a sort of a social media guide for all of our everyone in a leadership role in our youth program that I'm going to send to Lucas and he can give you as well if you prefer that. But this one is like the full blast kind of thing. So if that's helpful for you, go ahead and download it. Happy to be a resource. Okay, so there we go. So we kind of given you some stuff. We can go to that very last slide. This is where we've gone, right? So we want to celebrate adolescent development. We want to rebel against the isolating structures of society and just feel free to do different. Do not feel that you are stuck in the ruts that have been created by other people. Do it better. When you see stuff that's toxic, you change it. And then setting really good boundaries, which is just as much about us modeling them as much as setting them when they're needed. Will there be pushback? Yes, but thankfully you're not the kind of parents who are going to like lose sleep over your kid thinking you suck, right? Because who cares? You're their parent and you love them, and when they're 30, they'll thank you, so that's good enough. And then the last bit there is to be very present in every aspect of their life, that you are there for them. And we work in ourselves of taking away the things we do and unintentionally create barriers. We don't start stories with, well, when I was your age. We don't just give blatant advice. Being present, think about how you want someone to be present with you. You want them to take great delight in you, despite all of your flaws. You want them to demonstrate they want to be with you. And you want them to listen to you. Be present in their lives. This is the remedy for the crisis that we live in. So that being said, let's open it up for some Q&A. And I'm happy to stick around after as well. So is there any, I mean, this is a huge topic, so anything at all that you're wondering about, or I may not have been very clear in certain things, so please feel free.
Ryan, how
Yes.
do you balance the tension of giving our teens freedom and boundaries?
Absolutely. So the question was, how do you balance the tension of freedom and boundaries? Very carefully, but I think what it looks like is that we want to create this world where there are natural consequences to behaviors, so that they begin to understand that if I do something that's not wise, if I live poorly, it's not going to be. It doesn't end well. But that didn't come from this artificial thing. It was this real life thing that happened. But the freedom and boundaries is that needs to be an appropriate natural consequence at an appropriate time. So the freedom and boundaries, I will give you freedom to experience natural consequences in these things where you could make a real mistake and it could really bite you. But I'm going to make sure, like when you're 12 and 13 and 14, that the real potential consequence of the mistake you might make is not going to be catastrophic for your life at that time, right? So it's actually this phased approach, and it's this, as they demonstrate, like, okay, I'm mastering this little bit of freedom, we work a little bit more with the boundaries. So that's why when they're 4 years old, you're sitting there saying like, the natural consequence is like, okay, when they're 20 months old. And your 20-month-old will not stop climbing up on dining room chairs no matter how much you tell them not to do it. I just kind of figure, I'm like, well, you know what? It's this high off the ground. You'll learn. And the kid falls off the chair and he cries and we pick him up and we're like, good. For the physician in the house, there was no signs of increased intracranial pressure nor concussion, and there were no neurodeficits. Okay, so anyway, so it was good. And then they learned that this is really bad. There's natural consequences. I shouldn't do that. Like, that is the best. This is really helpful. But what I'm not going to do is be like, stop going on the road. Well, you'll learn. like that's insane. Like, we just like, no. Like, never, right? So it's the freedom and boundaries is about, it's like we're gauging these spots where it's like, I want you to be in this place where you really could make a mistake that you feel for real, but it will not catastrophically mark your life. So, a great example of freedom and boundaries becomes, I got a 13-year-old, so we're in this stage now where we're letting her make more and more decisions, not every night, about bedtimes and things. Right? And of course, it's like, oh, I have this freedom, whatever. So, there's this sleepover party that happened, and we were shocked to find out that they literally pulled an all-nighter. We're like, what? You did? Like, it's just crazy. Like, you actually did this. And we just said, cool. Did you have a great time? Yeah, awesome. Well, your family birthday party is tonight, so here's what you need to do. You need to vacuum this, 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 and this. I'm so tired. Well, it sucks, doesn't it? Like, who stayed up all night? You did. I was thinking I'm going to need a nap. We better work fast. Like, that's, you knew we were doing this. Like, this is, like, you made a decision. These are the natural consequences. And that's what happened. We vacuumed really fast, and then we took a nap, and then it was like, oh, I'm feeling much better now. You know what? I don't get, hey, there was just freedom and boundaries, right? And so we're working these things out. So as they get older and they're able to handle more, I think that's the tension, is that we just want to make sure that we don't rob kids from the opportunity of maturing by learning through reality, right? And so that's kind of the thing there. So with social media, the problem becomes is sometimes the consequences could actually be catastrophic, right? So say freedom, well, if I gave my kid an Instagram, sure, it'll be fine. I don't need to check it. They'll learn. Really, they'll learn when some like pedophile like stalks them. Like actually, like no, that's catastrophic. Your 14-year-old will learn when they've encountered like hardcore pornography and like consistently because they'd have unfiltered. No, like that's catastrophic. So we're looking at saying what's catastrophic, what's not, and eventually we turn over more and more and more boundaries to them, and we teach wisdom. Cool. Yeah. Any other questions? It's a really good question, Lisa, by the way. It's excellent. Really good. 5 stars. Cool. All right, well, since it doesn't appear as there are any other questions, which means that I'm either the best communicator you've like heard ever, or that I'm terrifying as an individual. Oh, there we go. Thank you, by the way, because I was really torn between those two. I appreciate it. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
What are they, have you heard, or what are they people doing to curb that? If
That's a great question. So what's interesting is, the nature of the addiction to technology, and this is really where Facebook got a little bit nervous, and Apple got the most nervous. There's actually a science behind how to keep people engaged. There's actually this is research that was being incorporated into app development intentionally. And what it was is the idea of stimulating the reward center in your brain. And so the idea is as you use our app, you find a reward. We increase the challenge. You stay a little bit longer, work a little hard, find another reward, and we actually create this. It's this idea of reward that drives it. And so this is why if you were to download, your kid downloads any free game on the internet, the first 10 levels are like crazy easy, and they're getting all these like, wow, you're like the best at this game. You aced it 100%. You unlocked this. You unlocked that. You unlocked, like, man, this is great. I'm so awesome at this. I just want to keep playing. And then it goes and 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 it goes. And once you've been playing it for maybe 2-3 months, and you realize I can't get any further in this game, but if I get my parents' credit card and I buy this thing on here, then I'm going to unlock this, and then I can finally beat that level. And so this is how, and so the thing is that these apps were actually designed intentionally using research on neuroscience and how the brain works in terms of like, how can we just start manipulating that dopamine in your head? Like that's what we're going for. And then we combine that like physiologically with this, all like these flashing blue lights and all these types of things too. You get this just a tremendous amount of activity in the brain, and so your brain just lit up and it's just going, and there's all this reward stuff going on too. So that's kind of the nature of it, and that's why it's especially heinous, because the problem is when you've got an 8-year-old with an iPad who is being exposed to an app that has been deliberately designed to suck you in. That's where we're saying this is actually child endangerment. Like this isn't healthy. This is scary. Now it's not healthy for adults either, but the thing is, the idea is that, in the same way that, we can say, hey, am I going to go to the casino or not? Do I know my limit and play within it and that sort of thing? Like we let adults make those decisions. We don't let 8-year-olds take their allowance to the casino though, right? And a lot of these games are really that same thing. We're saying we're sending them to the casino, and so before you know it, they owe $20,000 at the blackjack table, and someone's going to take their thumbs, and we're like, but he's 8, and you're like, well, too bad. That's kind of how it goes. So in terms of getting through it, what's fascinating now is we're actually seeing a lot of therapists who are specializing now in dealing with digital addiction. and walking people through it. And it's very much the same kind of process for any other addiction. There's a detox and there's a rehabilitation, right? And so the good news is I mean, I can't speak with tremendous authority to this because this is not my vocational field, but in all of the research that I've read and in the journals that I've kind of looked at for this, is they're saying that the brain is actually able to respond. Like you can bounce back from these things. So the science there is called neuroplasticity. It's the idea of the adaptability of our brain based on stimulus over time and that sort of thing. And so the idea is that if you do detox and you do rehab, you are more vulnerable to this addiction a second time. However, you can put good guardrails into your life, learn how to manage it, and you can actually kind of reclaim, where there will come a point where you're not having anxiety when your phone's not in your hand. But depending on how long it's been going on, getting professional help is honestly where a lot of these things end up going. Yeah, so it's wild stuff, and this is why we got to set those boundaries, right? We have to be aware that this is a real thing, and yeah, so we're really frustrating parents in our house because it's like, this is the time limit. Yeah, but I just got to hear. It's like, well, we're just going to cut that off and just say no, as we're not going to let this continue to suck you in and whatnot. Yeah. So if you have somebody in your life that's like that. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. That's a great question. So the question was, if you got someone who's already got a technology addiction and you're trying to set boundaries, how do you do it? You know what? Here's the key principle in treating addiction is addiction is generally self-medication. We're self-medicating. Now, getting it that some 8-year-old who started playing some game is probably not self-medicating from something. They just kind of got sucked into it. But the principle, what we've learned about addiction as a form of self-medication is still applicable. And so the rule is that we don't take away something you depend on without replacing it with something else. Right, that's just the nature of it, and so so we would look at anyone who's we start getting into working with hardened drug addicts, and yes, they went through. I mean, dear Lord, they went through detox, which was like the hell of their life, and they're in rehab. And what's the first thing we got to do? We got to introduce what was that drug was your best friend. You need community. That drug was your escape from this childhood trauma. You need therapy. So we would look at it that way. And so I think one of the things that we want to do when we're helping people with this is we actually want it can be fun. It can be an adventure. Like, so the thing is, when I'm just sitting there being like, that's it, no phones or whatever, you know what the best way to launch into that is? It's, hey, so this is really cool. We got this. We're going whitewater rafting. It's going to be crazy, though. They told us anything we bring is probably going to get trashed. So we got like this GoPro and like waterproof. We got to leave our phones at home because they're just going to get killed. We're on the water for like 4 days. It's going to be amazing and epic. Cool. Like, that's a great way to start detox, right? Because we're replacing it with something else. And it's an adventure and it's fun. And so the thing is, cutting out something that they have depended on, and especially in a social situation, something they depend on to feel normal, because they don't have social skills, they haven't interacted very much. So you put them in a room full of people, they can't just flip to their phone. They're really having a hard time. We can't just pull it away. We need to think about how we can replace it with something that's healthier. And you can go slow. We can go slow. But if it's advanced, I think getting professional guidance is always the way to go. And it is a very real addiction. Like, it's something that we see far more common now. So yeah, it's a great question, by the way. Cool. Any other questions? Anything else I could speak to real quick? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess your kids don't have streaks yet that they have to keep up.
No, they don't. And streaks on Snapchat, if you're unfamiliar, so streaks is this idea of how many days in a row you back and forth sending these messages, right? And so think about what that's really about. If you break your streak, you're up to 100, and you start over at 0, it feels like a defeat, doesn't it? So what is that? That is just a mechanism in an app to force you to use it consistently. And streaks used to be a really big thing, and so we would have kids come on trips like, do I really have to leave my phone because I got like some streaks? And I'm like, yeah, you do. It's amazing, those streaks don't compete well with real world connection, and so they didn't really miss them later. But this is a real thing. This is how these things get into our lives. And so one of the things I mentioned in the paper is that we act subversely towards technology every time we refuse to give it the opportunity to control our lives. So we actually look for ways to buck the system and say, this technology seeks to control me through this, and I just won't allow it. I'm going to do this with the technology instead. And you know, so to have an intentional plan of how we actually subvert technology's attempt to control us. That might sound really complex, but yeah, that's kind of where I start thinking on this stuff. So, great. Okay, well, any other questions? Okay, well, I am happy to stick around for a little bit too, but thank you guys so much. This has been a lot of fun. I don't usually get to talk about this much stuff in such a short amount of time. When we talk about this content, it's usually spread out over a year. So you're all champs because you've been drinking out of the fire hose. Seriously, like we do a seminar on each of the 4 things individually over the course of a year. And you guys have been drinking out of the fire hose and doing very well. So bless you in that. But thanks so much. It's been an honor to come and speak to you. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.